astronauts, and then through the years. Today, she is still a big champion of making sure that the space industry hires people from every background possible.
And what's heartening is you've got, past, some famous women of the past, or lesser-known women as well, present, and also future people. I mean, it's a couple who are really at the cutting edge. We've just been talking about Virgin Galactic. You've got Kelly Latimer, who's a test pilot, and also you've got a woman who is one of the senior people at SpaceX.
Yes, Gwynne Shotwell is her name. She's an amazing lady, doing great things in SpaceX. She is, I believe, the company president, and so really up there working alongside Elon Musk, making all of these amazing things that SpaceX are doing happen. And one of the things I love about what Gwynne says is that failure is a part of what you're trying to do. They think that if you're not failing,
it's just going to have to go with the weird title.
It really is. You need to do that. You need to push the boundaries. And one of my favourite things SpaceX have put out is their slightly
welcome to the stream.
It's just before they have mastered that amazing feat of landing those rockets. So yeah, there's a great selection of women, and I should say that all of the illustrations are from the students at the London College of Communications.
I like that,
beautiful.
Yes, I like that because each one is different because they're done by a different student, and I thought that was a lovely touch. And this book really, I mean, I would say it's aimed at younger women. Is that right?
No, not just women. I'm very keen that everybody thinks they can read it. I get really touched when I see little boys reading it, just because it's so important that everybody sees that women are a part of the industry. I wrote it with sort of 8 to 14-year-olds in mind, but you could read it to young people
I really enjoyed it.
Older people.
Because to me it was a mix of the ones that I expected, like Valentina Tereshkova, Samantha Cristoforetti, Helen Sharman, Jerry Cobb, who we mentioned, but also there was the sort of the unusual women who were seamstresses.
Messing around with the camera too much.
Program. You had, which I
Start
thought was
working
really
out.
controversial inclusion, really, the Mercury 7 astronauts' wives.
The thing that I wanted to bring across there was that everybody sees the astronauts, and they're the headline grabbers, they're the people that everybody can name. But their jobs are hugely taxing on their families, and the families are such an important support network. And all the wives, and indeed the husbands, and the rest of the families that I know and I speak to, they all say, I'm just doing my job, it's just part of us, it's part of the marriage, it's part of the relationship. But I think anybody does well in their job if they have that support network behind them. So I wanted to celebrate that. And the Mercury 7 wives in particular, they were the first ones who were suddenly flung into the spotlight with immense training and preparation. Their husbands were the ones that the media were interested in, but then they realised they could go and see these women, and they had to suddenly be this amazing magazine-ready version of an American wife, perfect in every way. And it's not what they signed up for and they were expecting.
It's what Gene Cernan's wife, first wife Barbara, said. If you think going to the moon is hard, you should try staying. I think it comes across quite well in my favourite film, Apollo 13.
Yes.
And I think that's quite, it's quite nice to see the other side of it and how they have to put on this whole act.
It really is.
All these things that are going to appear on the cover of Life magazine.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to put them in there too.
Well, that's because we discussed it on the train coming in. Because when I first saw it, I thought, oh no, they shouldn't be in. No. And then actually, by the time I'd read it and we discussed it, I thought, actually, no, that's a really good thing to do, because you're right. Because very few people are achieving isolation. For most of us, that requires support and help of some kind from all areas, not just the professional side.
Does it concern you, or should it concern us, the absence of Russians in here? And I mean, not just in your book, but the fact that there are very few, for example, female cosmonauts.
I touch on that in there. Russia have a different culture to us, and that's something we need to understand before we just write them off and say it's wrong. Some of the things I read when I was researching the book to understand this, you sort of read that Russian women see their place in the home, and they're
constantly told to get in the kitchen on the space station.
Oh, they are, but some of them feel that that's what they want to do, and it would not be appropriate for them. And we may view that and say, no, everybody should be having their equal roles. But if they're choosing to do that, then I have no issue with that. But it is sad that in the 500 or so people in space, 50 of some of them women, 4 of them have been female Russian cosmonauts. Female Russian cosmonauts, and I find that sad and strange.
We've discussed that on the podcast before as well. It's almost as if it's a been there, done that when they sent Valentina up, because it was pretty much 20 years before they put. And it's Svetlana who's in your book, isn't it? Yeah.
And Svetlana only went because again the Russians ever aware of the propaganda first. They were wanting to beat Sally Ride and then the first female spacewalk. So it was never about equality or choosing the right people. It was all about that propaganda. This book tells the story of the human space race and the people who were involved in that. But as we know, space is this huge thing that underpins all of our lives. And I'd really like to tell the stories of the people who have put the weather satellites in orbit, the satellite navigation systems, and all the planetary missions that we've done out to Mars and Pluto and Jupiter and all of those things. There's so many more women in the wider industry.
Well, you must have made some quite difficult choices, because you've got, Mae Jemison in there, you've got Sunny Williams, 2 NASA astronauts. There's a nice variety of engineers, psychologists, nurses, all these ranges of women who were involved, and we know from things like Hidden Figures that women weren't absent. We were there, and things like this help publicise that. But you obviously have to leave women out.
Certainly, there were people I could put in. There were people that I wanted to put in, but I felt they didn't fit in the book. Really, my choices were driven by what have these women done in human spaceflight, and it wasn't good enough just to have gone to space to be an astronaut. Really, I was looking for people who had been trailblazers or had, in some way, played a real sort of key contribution to their area. And there's so many more who were in there, and I do hope I get.
Yes.
tell more stories.
I say it's a sort of book I would have loved. Well, I didn't. I've enjoyed it now, but if I'd had that when I was sort of 10, I think I probably would have been even more of a geek. I think I probably would have been even more of a geek. But it's nice to know you're not alone. You know, that's the thing. Is that it was Sally Wright who said, if you can't, you can't be if you can't see. That's what it does. Is that it shows you that your face is there, and all its colours and forms and ages.
And it's not just astronauts. People think human spaceflight, they think space is astronauts. There are roles for everybody in the space sector if you want to come and get involved. And I hope that message comes across.
Absolutely.
Well, still to come, we celebrate the time when Britain was ahead of the Americans in space. It is quite a long time ago. This is the Space Boffins podcast in partnership with the Naked Scientists.
You might not associate grassy banks with the coast.
It is a bit like stepping abroad for a second.
People singing Welsh. It's just another day at the office.
Yeah, just another day in the office, mate.
I have you loud and clear.
The Naked Scientist podcast takes you to the science topics you need to hear about. Physics, medicine, literature. Keep up to date with what's going on in the field. First this week, the announcement from LIGO. And find out the answers to every question you never thought to ask.
What kills more people, sharks or selfies?
To subscribe, search Naked Scientist podcast or head over to our website.
We're on all the usual social media channels. On Facebook, you can see a video of us recording the sensation of weightlessness for the podcast. We'll also have the usual pictures of our recording today and a link to our fabulous programme on the Voyager missions for the BBC, Space 1977. If you have missed it, it is one of the highlights of the BBC World Service documentaries from the last year.
Yeah, very well
Much as
done.
I don't like blowing my own trumpet. You can contact us via Facebook or by email, and we are actually getting better at responding. For example, we have an email from Jeff in Washington State who has a question about the problems of short-term political thinking when it comes to space exploration, and we will get to that in a future podcast. So thank you, Jeff.
Right, well, London's Science Museum is currently celebrating the recent 60th anniversary of Britain entering the space age with a small but perfectly formed exhibition called Skylark, Britain's pioneering space rocket. Originally developed for military use, Skylark was a sounding rocket about 7 metres high, containing scientific instruments that sounded or took measurements of the atmosphere and space during short suborbital, can barely say that, parabolic flights. More than 400 Skylark missions took place, and the aim of the exhibition is to inform people basically about a relatively unknown piece of British space history and to highlight its
going over
scientists and
our camera.
engineers. Many of them,
How much
like
is
here,
going?
went on to great things with missions for ESA and NASA. Well, I was at the
All
opening
right,
of the
thank you
exhibition
for
and
joining
spoke
me.
first to Ken Pounds, Emeritus Professor of Space Physics at the University of Oxford.
The original scientific and military aim of the whole Skylark and subsequent satellite program was to study the atmosphere, to find out more about the atmosphere from a scientific point of view, but also from the view of a perspective of the military, who foresaw that future wars would be fought mainly with ballistic missiles. So they needed to know the environment through which the missiles were going. But then things evolved, and in my particular case, it was the realization, which of course is fairly obvious, that the atmosphere is controlled by the sun. The sun heats the atmosphere, it causes the ionosphere, which Marconi used to bounce radio waves around the world and so on. So if you're studying the atmosphere directly with probes, then you should be studying the sun at the same time, particularly where the sun is a very variable source, like in X-rays. So that was basically what I did for my PhD, developing some instrumentation to put on Skylark to measure solar X-rays. Now that was at a time when basically it was still not clear whether the sun would be a powerful X-ray source, but we suspected it probably was, because we knew of this outer atmosphere that you see during a total eclipse called the corona. There were reasons to believe the corona was incredibly hot, like a few million degrees, in which case it would naturally emit X-rays. So we carried out a few experiments on Skylark and found that to be the case. And then for me, everything changed because an American group run by a guy called Riccardo Giccone, who then got the Nobel Prize for Physics as a result of that, they found another incredibly bright X-ray source that was nothing to do with the sun, nothing to do with our local environment, and that was the beginning of cosmic X-ray astronomy. Ever since, I've sort of spent my time studying black holes out in space.
John Zarnecki, President of the Royal Astronomical Society.
John, I was pretty surprised to discover that you've been involved in Skylark, although I shouldn't be, of course. It's just that we're more used to having you on the podcast in relation to Titan.
Well, you didn't think I was old enough,
No,
that's the truth, but I started very, very young, I was 12 years old when I started working on Skylark. No, seriously, I started a PhD at University College London, and within a few months I was given the opportunity to develop an instrument for a Skylark rocket launch, which had been approved. I think when I started, I was 22, and the people I worked with were mostly of the same age, but we were just given enormous responsibility. It was so exciting,
I bet. Particularly in terms of where you got to do the launch.
Yes, well, of course, most of the Skylarks were launched from Woomera in Australia, in the middle of the desert. I mean, wow, for a boy who grew up on the mean streets of London, this was quite a culture shock. But scientifically, it was also fantastic. This was the early days of the new astronomies. Obviously for centuries, astronomy had been done from the surface of the Earth using visible light. But of course, the electromagnetic spectrum is enormous, encompassing X-rays, gamma rays, ultraviolet, infrared, and so on. most of this is absorbed in the Earth's atmosphere. And with the coming of the space age, it gave us the opportunity to get above the atmosphere, build your telescopes and detectors to measure this radiation, and it opened up a whole new astronomy. We were able to study very hot, very energetic objects. In my case, supernovae, stars which have exploded, which produce vast quantities of million-degree gas emitting X-rays, so that's what I was looking at. But also the very cold universe, which produces infrared radiation. And the sounding rockets, which now are superseded. I mean, their day is past. But for probably 20 years, they were a really, really valuable tool. And not just in the science they generated, but also the training they gave to people like me. I've used that experience in exotic space projects like Hubble Space Telescope, Giotto to Halley's Comet, Cassini-Huygens to Saturnus, and so on. So I owe a lot to the Skylark project.
My name is Doug Millard. I'm Deputy Keeper of Technologies and Engineering here at the Science Museum. I was the curator for the Skylark exhibition. Skylark I've known about for many years, but it was quite clear that many people hadn't. So this exhibition is largely to bring Skylark's fame and significance to the public eye.
And what would you say is its greatest achievement? I've been chatting to scientists whose careers were made and began by Skylark, but would you say it was it's the effect it had on people or the effect it had on science, or maybe both?
So looking at the very early Skylark flights, it was that expertise developed which enabled the UK to work with NASA on the world's first international satellite, Ariel 1. It was quite clear to NASA that there were guys in this country who knew how to build spacecraft. Thereafter, Skylark did loads of science, not least because most were launched from the southern hemisphere in Australia, so conducting, for example, the first UV survey of the southern skies. But it was a training ground for young space scientists doing their PhD thesis, and they went on to great things. So really, a lot of what we see elsewhere in the Space Gallery here at the Science Museum owes its existence to Skylark.
And my name's Alan Smith. I'm a professor at University College London. It's not nostalgia. I don't have that feeling. Not nostalgia. I don't have that feeling. I have a pride, certainly, but also a sense that the world's moved on, and this is something that was good in its time.
And the nice thing about it is that it's British history as well, that so many people have forgotten about.
Yes, absolutely, but it also makes you feel a little bit sad that we were right at the forefront, and now we are not quite as much at the forefront, and so that high position in space has diminished a little bit. We're still very, very well respected. But,
We punch above our weight, don't
we punch above our weight, but we were in a different league in those days, where we were on par with the Americans, and in Skylark we were leading the Americans.
The success and legacy of Britain's first space rocket, Skylark.
Was it taking off in the background?
Yes, it was on a sort of loop on a film. That's why you kept hearing it take off several times. By the way, in between going to Harvard and applying to NASA, an American, Jeff Hoffman, actually worked in the UK on Skylark, and then he later became an astronaut and helped to fix the optics on the Hubble Space Telescope. So that's a little snippet I picked up while I was there.
Now, Libby, you are microgravity program manager for the UK Space Agency. So that was a description, not an accusation. These microgravity experiments. So we've talked about the zero G. We've had the Skylark, which essentially went up and came back down again. You've got, I think, the drop towers as well. Essentially, was dropping something down a tower. I know Virgin Galactic is looking to sell space on its spaceship too for these microgravity experiments. How much value do they have compared to actually being in space and being able to do these things continuously?
Every experiment has a different set of parameters. Some people need a long time in space, and that's where the space station is the only way you can do that. But not everybody does, and it's much more expensive to send things up into orbit. The experiments we were doing with the University of Brighton team, they were perfect for the parabolic flight. You could see the phenomena in the 20 seconds, and it didn't matter that you went between hyper-G and zero-G. Somebody I was just talking to the other day was looking at wanting to test a new form of fuel tank, and I was actually saying to them the suborbital flights that are coming up are probably going to be just the thing. 20 seconds isn't long enough. You don't need to go all the way into space, perhaps. So everybody has a different set of requirements, and we need all these different facilities to match those.
And just on Skylark,
Well, yeah, probably.
British rocket, if you like. I mean, we're getting back at least thinking about that, aren't we, in the UK? I mean, there's this launch campaign, a Launch UK campaign by the UK Space Agency at the moment to look at a launch site in the UK. So it's looking like we could be back in the rocket business.
We are working to get a spaceport in the UK by the 2020s. That will allow us to have a small satellite launch capability. As you say, getting back in there, it would be wonderful to see. We're looking at suborbital flights. We're letting the market decide these things. And that's really where we've come from the 1950s. Times have changed, technology's improved. We do everything in the UK based on business cases. It's taxpayers' money. It's got to be done that way. And there's now a market opening up, and we're looking to capitalise on that and make the most of everything for the UK and for our economy.
And on a sort of related level, you've got something called cool space going on at the moment, which I think
Yeah, this is what I'm working on at the minute. It's very exciting. The UK scientific community hasn't had a lot of opportunities to get to the space station because we weren't part of that programme until 2012. And so we've just announced a call for ideas for anyone in the UK from industry or academia who has an experiment idea that they'd like to run on the International Space Station. They can submit that before the end of February. And we're going to, all being well with our budgets, choose some of those to then develop them and send them to the International Space Station so we get UK science to the space station before it's due for retirement in 2024.
Details from that, we'll put a link to the page on our Facebook page and on Twitter. Well, thanks ever so much, Libby Jackson from the UK Space Agency and author of the wonderful The Galaxy of Her Own, Amazing Stories of Women in Space.
Space Boffins is a Boffin media production in partnership with the Naked Scientists, and we're supported by the Atrium Space Insurance Consortium. Do reach out to us, as they say in America.
Reach out.
You can only say reach out if you're a member of the Four Tops.
Thanks for reaching out.
So reach us via Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We are not difficult to track down. Thanks for listening.
Your team just added its 67th AI tool and also your 67th security blind spot. The good news? The Vanta agent works like a GRC engineer in the background, finding every app your team uses, scoring the risk, and drafting fixes for you. Vanta is the platform used by over 16,000 fast-moving companies like Cursor, Atlassian, and Superbase, who are shaping the future with AI and staying ahead of AI risk. Get started at Vanta.com.
All engines are started.
We'd like to stir up your cryo tank.
Oh, wow, it's going up so slowly.
We turned up the space fire during the flight to be engaged with the hope of radio, and television devices.
Station, this is Houston. Are you ready for the event?
Hello, we've returned to the hallowed surroundings of the British Interplanetary Society Library in London for this month's Space Boffins podcast with Richard Hollingham and Sue Nelson in partnership with the Naked Scientists.
This month, we'll be talking to a genuine rock star whose head is in stars, Queen guitarist Brian May. Also the first British astronaut, Helen Sharman, and we'll pay tribute to NASA legend John Young, possibly the greatest ever American astronaut.
And thanks to an email from Jeff in Vancouver in Washington State, USA, we'll be discussing space and politics with our guest, former NASA engineer, now editor of Spaceflight magazine, and author of dozens of books on space. I gave up counting, to be honest. David Baker. There are lots of visions here surrounding us at the British Interplanetary Society for how space might be or might have been. Like a fold of space elevators over there, astronautics, various missions to Mars. Vision. Yeah, there's a brilliant sculpture, this model of a space plane, a British space plane that might have been in the 1960s. Are we on track now, though, for some of this stuff, do you think?
I really think we are. The very motto of the British Interplanetary Society, from imagination to reality, really epitomises the themes that have retained that sense of creative futurism, which was begun by the founding fathers of the BIS in the 1930s, not least of whom was Arthur C. Clarke. But yes, I do think we are on the verge of that.
We must just quickly mention that sculpture, this wonderful chrome or silver-looking space plane that, remarkably, you told me it was from the 1960s, and yet it looks like one that a commercial company could be building today.
Well, it was called Mustard, and it was certainly one of the most creative projects to come from the British aerospace industry in the first few years of the dawn of the space age. And it was very much in the vein, everybody was thinking of reusable launching vehicles. We think that they're quite new, but in fact, shortly after the space age began, and the launches each year were accelerating in frequency, it was pretty clear that we had to bring elements of the launch vehicle. And so design engineers from the aircraft industry set to work designing reusable shuttlecraft, and it was from that NASA's concept of the shuttle arose. But Britain, yes, was looking to put Mustard as a replication of that rocket that was to have been the first stage of the launch vehicle.
I love it called Mustard. Get a more British name.
Mustard. Excellent. We'll talk more a bit later with David. I'm going to start with the International Science and Musical Festival, STARS, because it's just announced its 5th outing in Bern in Switzerland, June of next year. Founded by astrophysicist Garrick Israelian, which I think sounds like a Blake 7 name, quite frankly, it's a brilliant name. The lineup for 2019 is the 50th anniversary of the first moon landing, so it will feature 5 Apollo astronauts, as well as cosmonauts, space shuttle astronauts, and scientists such as Kip Thorne, Jill Thompson, and Alan CERN. There's also a crossover between science and music with the influence of Brian May, who helped secure musicians for the festival. Now, he left university before completing his PhD in astrophysics at Imperial College London, and that was to concentrate on being the lead guitarist of an up-and-coming band called Queen. Now, that worked out reasonably well for him, but the lure of space and astronomy called him back, so he went to Imperial again, completed his PhD in 2007. Well, I was at the launch of STARS, and I spoke to Brian for the Space Boffins podcast.
I'm Dr. Brian May, and you could call me a boffin, but it wouldn't be quite accurate, really. You could call me a nerd.
Oh, look at the space geeks here, and it's
yeah, space nerds.
What made you get involved in STARS in the first place?
Well, Garrick and I go back a very long way, and I first knew Garrick when he came to me and asked me to help him on a movie project, which was about the Earth getting ravaged by a solar flare. We never made the movie in the end, but we became very good friends. Actually, somebody else kind of made the movie. But we didn't. Yeah, but we had so much in common.
Hey, or
we both had to make a choice. We were both passionate about music and astronomy, and we both had to make a choice at some point in our life. And we made opposite choices. You know, I discovered that my supervisor didn't like my thesis, and so I threw my hands up and said, I can't do this anymore. And it just so happened that I could go out make music for the next 30 years. Garrick was also a very good musician, but decided that his real talent was being an astronomer, and he pursued that course. So we came together both with a passion for both things, but having sort of made opposite decisions, but also coming back in. The fact that he's making a movie, and the fact that he's pursuing all these favorite musicians like Wakeman, Tangerine Dreams, it really brought us together. We had so much.
I'm wondering.
Right, let's hopefully I don't hurt myself.
Degree now,
Right,
whether actually your direction would have been in the other way, that maybe you would have become a scientist first, with music on the back burner.
No, I had a severe attack of I'm not good enough about this, and I've since discovered that I wasn't alone in having that feeling. It's a very common.
Imposter syndrome.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Yes, it's really, but yeah. So I seriously thought I cannot do this. I'm not good enough. So I was very happy to go off into music. But 30 years later, uniquely, I had the opportunity of coming back and finishing off the thesis in the institution where I'd started 30 years before. Michael Rowan Robinson became my supervisor, and I threw everything up for a year and rewrote my thesis basically in the light of what had happened in the last 30 years. It wasn't easy, you can tell.
Yeah.
Especially if people didn't want to be seen to be kind to me. They probably reacted in the opposite direction. That was really tough, but I got the doctorate after 35 years basically, and that brought me back into the world of science. And the fact that Garrick and I were by that time organising Star Wars had brought Garrick back into the world of music. So I found myself with Johan Gasparian in the land of the Midnight Sun. I'm playing guitar, he's playing good, and Garrick is conducting and playing bits of keyboard. So it really brought everything together.
There's something about music and science, isn't there? Because I mean, the obvious Einstein with his violin. There's more recently there's Patrick Moore with his xylophone. There's Brian Cox with the piano.
Absolutely.
Like quite a few members of Queen, but also with science backgrounds.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it goes back a long way. That's the way it should be. I've been saying this a lot today, and I feel proud of the fact that we're bringing it all back together because it shouldn't be separate. It shouldn't be a choice of whether you're an artist or a scientist, and that kind of damaged me when I was growing up. I didn't think it was right, and I confirm that feeling now. The complete human being has the whole thing. He should be inquisitive about the universe around him. He should also be instinctive about the things that he creates in arts and various forms. And that's being a human being. Being a human being is not being fragmented. I'm a scientist or an artist. That's all, to me, that's all counterproductive.
Is Star Wars a way of you combining your two loves?
Absolutely, yes. I was the perfect partner for Garrick, and I pushed him and I encouraged him, and I'm still his confessor. He still comes to me when he gets upset, which frequently happens because it's a difficult job he does. I mean, it's incredibly difficult, really, the amount of stress he goes through.
Have a slurp, and I'll ask you. How would you compare your festival with, say, something like Blue Dot, which also combines music and science that takes place at Jodrell Bank?
Yeah, well, I haven't seen it, so I don't know. But yes, I think we're on similar lines. It's great. I think that the whole movement is growing.
Do you see this as the future, perhaps, then, of communicating astronomy, space, is combining it with the arts?
I do, as human beings, yes. Of course, we all have to become specialists, but that doesn't mean that we should hide away in a corner. And, in the beginning, I was a little bit embarrassed about being a musician when I was in the Department of Infrared Astronomy at Imperial College. They were all a bit kind of smirky about it when he goes up and plays a guitar. And most of the scientists of that particular moment were not at all aware of modern popular music. But now it's completely different. You look at Matt Taylor, who is more.
We've had Matt Taylor on the podcast a lot.
Yeah, well, he's a top explorer, scientist, technician. Guy. He's covered in tattoos.
Heavy metal fan.
Yeah, he's the biggest heavy metal freak I've ever met. Absolutely. He's got a tattoo of Einstein here, next to a tattoo of Lemmy over here. So I love that. I love the fact that people are really taking pleasure in being a complete human being.
So your audience, then, who would be your ideal audience?
The audience we've got, really. You mean that's Queen? Oh, you mean Star Wars? It's just what it is, yeah.
Queen likes Queen.
Well, everybody. I'm sure there's a few people. There's a few people taking pot shots at us over the years. Yeah, our audience is just. Our audience is just organically growing. It's lovely. I love kind of people. All walks of life. Some people are scientists and have a natural bent. Some people are very much not scientists or musicians, and they come just because they're inspired by the idea.
Are you doing anything with your science at the moment? I'm just wondering, with so many European missions on, that maybe you can get involved with this, with a mission as scientist.
Well, I do. Yeah, I hang around scientists. That's what I do. They've been. A lot of these guys have been very generous to me. I mean, Matt Taylor is one who sort of involved me in the Rosetta mission. Alan Stern.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I've been doing stereo pictures of the data that comes back, and I was also in the control room when New Horizons got the first information back from that flyby of Pluto, and I put the first stereoscopic picture of Pluto together, and went, and he's been great. So they kind of call me a collaborator. So I love it. To me, that's one of the greatest things I could possibly have. And Alan's invited me to go and Alan Stern, he's an amazing man. He wanted to go and do the same thing when they rendezvous with their next port of call, which is New Year next year. So I'm hoping to be there. We'll get the first stereo pictures of fantastic KBO. So I love it. I mean, I couldn't be happier. I get to go to observatories and people don't laugh at me anymore. I'm not saying they would, but you know what I'm saying? People treat me like I have a place.
Well, there's something about working within space like this as well, isn't it?
Yeah, lovely people. It's a great community, very open. And the people we meet at Star Wars are just, great. And they all come together, have fun. I'll never forget having breakfast with Neil Armstrong.
That's heavy.
Star Wars.
Pardon me.
I did the observatory in Nakoma. And just very relaxed. And looking back, I think, why didn't I ask him this? Why didn't I ask him that? But it wasn't like that. It was just people enjoying the moment.
How you going?
And the beauty of our surroundings.
Thanks for tuning in.
I've been so lucky in my life. So incredibly lucky.
What a nice Dr. Brian May. What an incredible, thoughtful guy, and he's right about this sense of completeness of the human being. I saw you nodding, David, then when when he mentioned that about feeling he didn't have to apologise for liking music and the arts as well as science. I mean,
It's hardly worthy of a comparison, but before I jetted off to the States in the early 1960s, I was down for the youth orchestra of Britain. Hardly worth mentioning within the exalted presence of Brian May, but I completely connect with that. Music has been, for most people I know in science engineering, it's that hidden bit that they should pull the veil away from and just accept that, you know, we actually are complete human beings if we express ourselves in all these
it's
different mediums.
creativity, isn't it? People often mistakenly think that anybody within the sciences is not creative.
I know.
And that's quite
How ridiculous. Yeah, exactly.
I'm not allowed to say. Can we beep it?
Can I bring my clarinet?
You could then, when I swear, you can just go.
Yes. Now, David, the reason we've asked you on is you are one of the most knowledgeable people I know on the politics of space. You write space flight. So we've had this email. This is from Jeff Osborne in Vancouver, Washington State in the USA. And he says, I've been enjoying your podcast for a year or so, which is very nice of him. I didn't have to read that bit out. I thought it would. You're UK-based, and I'm an American. One of the current problems with our democracy is that the president, as chief administrator, seems to be able to change long-term directions on a much shorter timescale than the work itself. For instance, it seems that each president recently has decided to fiddle with the direction of our space program. When programs take many years to prepare, having your goals reset every 4 years leads to wasted effort on an enormous scale. Discuss. Well, it's true, isn't it?
It's very true, and it goes right back to the beginning of the space program itself, in fact, because presidents like to surround themselves with successful national achievements and accomplishments that feed into goals that they set for various agencies and various aspirations, whether it's in technology, foreign policy, or social and welfare programs. Probably the first disruptive president on a massive scale was Kennedy, because only 3 years after NASA was formed, he decided to completely tear up the blueprint that NASA had itself created from consultation with scientists and engineers from the best of the United States, suddenly adopted the space program as a which he could brandish essentially technological superiority over the Cold War adversary, the Soviet Union. And so, as we all know, the moon decision was made at a time when Kennedy was not all that enamored with space. And in fact, we have from the Oval Office tapes verification that he was not at all keen to have the moon program serve as a precedent for continued high expenditure on space.
And so the plan, as I understand it, from NASA was actually a much more gradual plan. It's kind of gone in the wrong order, really. It was to establish maybe a space station in low Earth orbit, and then look to go further than that, then maybe land on the moon, and then head to Mars. So we'd be landing on the moon, I don't know, around now, in the last 10 years.
Well, that's certainly the case. And when you look at the diary of events that took place, Sputnik 1, October 57, a year of deliberation after shock horror about the event that really stunned the rest of the world, and the formation of NASA in October 1958, when it formally came into existence, it was generally agreed that there would be a progression from the Air Force manned space program that NASA Mercury across into a series of evolving capabilities that would sequentially grow on the accomplishments and achievements of each step. And the next step, the 1960 calendar year, was the Apollo program, which NASA wanted as an Earth-based laboratory, a circumlunar next step, and a moon landing third step. And Eisenhower was not at all convinced that he should sustain the space program. So NASA put that on the shelf. Kennedy came on board, and immediately after he was elected in November 1960, it was very clear that it was a sideline interest with him as something to pursue, but to just hold on to and not be invested. And he didn't turn down further investment in Apollo. And then, immediately after Yuri Gagarin, there was a famous memo on how can we literally disrupt the avalanche of accomplishments that the Soviet Union is embarked upon. And so the landing decision announced that the Union on the 25th of May 1961.
It's short-term political thinking. It's all about what can we next, what can we make, which happens today in politics. So let's talk about now then. We had the Obama administration has a very ill-defined idea of building Orion or an asteroid or maybe onto Mars, but not fully found out. You can correct me in a second. You can see your face there. And then we've got the administration now talking about going to the moon. Is that another example?
Well, it could be thought to be so, but in fact, immediately preceding the inauguration of President Obama, there was, of course, a decision based on the loss of Columbia that NASA had to make a strategic judgment as to whether to allow a lot more money into the shuttle to considerably upgrade with various technical improvements that were close to the program in the 1980s, indicating much more reliable boosters.
Thanks for tuning in.
A full-scale crew
Good to have you here.
Various structures such as that, and after the second shuttle was lost, Columbia, the Bush administration decided that rather than continuing to invest in that 1970s technology, which is what it was, that they would return NASA to the role for which it had been inaugurated by Congress, which was to advance the cause of exploration into the solar system. And so the Constellation program was named by Bush, which had a very large launch vehicle, which the derivative version of which is called the solar system, and also an Orion spacecraft that would be the fundamental core for moving between Earth and Moon, and that a moon lander, out there, as it was called, would be the vehicle to carry people down. And when Obama came in, that was the program that was set.
So what happens? We did an interview 5 years ago with anyone at NASA. It was all about Mars. We're going to Mars. Every launch, and the first Orion launch, it was stepping stones to Mars, but no, this narrative there just squeeze in between the rocket launching and clearing the tower. It's like some sort of 1984 where suddenly that we never said Mars. It's all about.
Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? When it's political, you think maybe NASA should be beyond politics.
Yes, indeed, and we're continually blighted by the desire of presidents to embrace accomplishments within either a 4 or an 8 year period of when they are inaugurated, because their maximum period of 8 years. And just reverting back to Kennedy, in the car on the way to declare his State of the Union address, he was going over and making noted changes to the speech, and the speech had been rather patronisingly put in by NASA, who wanted to really please the president, that they could achieve a moon landing by 1967 within the 8 year tenure, so that he could go out on a great big glory of I landed man on the moon. And to his credit, he said, I think you're boasting too much on this short term. Let's say the end of the decade. So he liberated himself from the blame that history could have accrued. But that did not catch with later presidents. When Carter came on board, he almost cancelled shuttle. It came within a whisker of being completely cancelled in the mid-1970s. When Clinton came on board, it came within one vote of Congress to completely cancel the International Space Station. But when the plan for Constellation under the Bush administration was examined by President Obama, he was totally and completely averse to any major government investment in space programs. And NASA's Deputy Administrator, Laurie Garber, became passionately convinced the White House, over the head of the NASA Administrator, Bolden, to push forward for complete commercialization of space. So the Obama administration latched on something that was so far out, they knew this. I've had discussions with White House staffers on this. We knew it would throw the ball so far that it would be so far out, nobody would even fake it, because it could have been accomplished within the term of the president anyway. So what did we do for this president? Well, okay, we're going to really push the Bush initiative, which was to have commercial launch vehicles, commercial supply to the space station, and then let's work out how they can push and commercialize the race to Mars. And it was the Obama administration that was probably the most disruptive since Kennedy for completely wrenching around the logic of how you progressively move from A to B.
So where are we at the moment? Because first, in terms of the politicians,
the advice in the second term of the Obama administration from NASA was, do not meddle with the original mission structure that NASA came aboard declaring itself able to achieve in the late 1950s, which was to have space station and then Mars. Don't disrupt that. We've now begun to get back the concept of operating people in low Earth orbit. To take them to Mars, it's an impossible, no-hope chance that's never going to succeed and could completely destroy future space planning by the fact that it actually brings in its own catastrophic demise through a total failure, which it would invoke. So many people at NASA in the second half of the Obama administration were saying, we've got to start to build at lunar distance a capability that we now have in low Earth orbit. We need to get people operating around the moon. Now, I did some studies for one of the NASA Field Centres 4 years ago, whereby we were looking at how you manipulate.
A lot of people here. Then let me go and stand on the street with you fucking signs and wait for people to
And I've done that.
Maybe give us
I've been in prisons in El Salvador.
So that you've got a lot of massive...
I've been in...
One of the things we were shocked by in the Apollo program was we, more than we were to alter the trajectory of the orbit. The important outcome was lowering the orbit of the space shuttle. This has bugged trajectory specialists ever since Apollo. How are you going to operate stations? The Earth is uniform and much more heterogeneous than the homogeneous moon. So we argued we need to go to the moon to get the working practices first.
And what about these commercial players then? Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, I mean, maybe to a minor extent, Richard Branson and the like. Could they do all this first? I mean, is there now, is there now just as likely that it will be private operators or some sort of combination of government and private? And are we on track, or is this going to all go up in the air again when the administration changes?
Well, while the NASA PR machine has been grinding out Mars first and Mars next and Mars now, I think many people in the agency have been quietly hiding under their desks waiting for the day when it would come. And it did come during, I think, beginning 5 years ago, everybody said, there ain't any way we're going to be able to go from this to Mars and straight away. So everybody began thinking, and talk has been going around with the International Space Station, when the thing of how long we're going to keep the space station going was fixed. It was understood we now need to move the space station to around the moon in what is now called the Deep Space Gateway. We need to learn the practices of how to operate people and how to keep them in space outside the Van Allen radiation belts. We need to learn to tackle the scientific and technical. So this is not new. The commercial industries are leveraging up in the knowledge that, and there's been much corridor talk and behind-the-scenes discussion with these guys. They know they're not going to single-handedly take humans to Mars. They know single-handedly they're not going to land people on moon settlements. But this is not new. And fast-tracking to what's happening now, all the learning practice and rehearsals and technology development of the space station is going to be transformed further out to support the infrastructure requirements, logistics and supplies for the Deep Space Gateway. And Moon First has been coming for 5 years. I compliment this administration. I know people have incredibly divergent views on the Trump administration, but what he has done is not tinker with what is coming anyway, and to take it as a sequential step. We want to keep him out of it, and as far as we're concerned, he's only interested in doing that.
Well, Jeff, I think that answers your question. If you want to get in touch with us, you can reach us via email, info@boffinmedia.co.uk. I think the .com works as well, but try it. And it was recently on Twitter and Instagram. I don't entirely understand. Do you understand?
It's a votive thing.
Yeah.
I call it a Death Star. Like, I don't like that. Okay. Anyway, still to come, I'll be talking to the first British astronaut, Helen Sharman. Also, what Space University is all about, and celebrating the life of John Young. This is the Space Office podcast.
Hopefully I don't put a hole in the head.
With the Naked Scientists. We're in the library of the British Country Society. The editor of Spaceflight magazine, David Baker. You can see pictures of us on Facebook, Twitter, and probably Instagram, and also pictures of Sue and her new best friend, Brian May.
And Helen, actually. And the reason I was sandwiched in between them both is because Helen Sharman, Britain's first astronaut, is also going to be a speaker at next year's Starmer Festival, and she was at the launch too. Now, Helen flew to the space station Mir in 1991. Mir exists, and that was succeeded by the International Space Station. Funding for that is also going to end within the next few years. So I asked Helen, how did you feel about it, and did you think we were actually going to buy into the future of human space travel?
I think what we're doing is saying a grand welcome to commercialisation of space. Actually, we're showing how commercialisation is already starting to reap benefits, which mean that the governments and the taxpayers don't have to fund the ongoing, the stuff that we can do now. That goes off to commercial companies, and I'm sure the International Space Station, something like it, will remain because it's produced such a lot of good science. And
so glad I didn't drop that on my head.
Other things as well, but we've got commercial companies that can launch, can return, they can drop onto the International Space Station. We just need them now to be safe enough to take people there, and we've got sort of a business that can be created. People are very willing to spend money on going to space themselves. So if they don't,
I feel so
to
tired.
focus on other aspects that the companies at the moment are not interested in. That is the way to go.
One of the themes for the festival is also going to be about the environmental aspect of our world, and it's something that astronauts in particular, the view from space often changes their view of the sort of fragility of the Earth. Did that happen to you as well?
I think a lot of astronauts have come back and talked about the environmental concerns. It's partly because it was a very hot topic of conversation and public discourse at the time. It didn't change my mind on the fragility of the Earth per se, but it certainly makes you realise how the world is just one of so much going on out in space, and there's nobody else that's going to really be bothered about it. Nobody else is going to pick up the pieces if we do make a mess of it. It is down to us. So I think perhaps that's something that becomes a bit more poignant. It becomes a bit more poignant when you sort of see how small we are in this vast universe. And for me, I learned a lot about human relationships and the value of those because they're what astronauts miss most in space.
Speaking of human relationships, the organisers of Star Masters, Alexei Leonov, and he was your boss when you were in Star City. How is your relationship with Alexei?
Alexei, I love him to bits. So yes, I remember him very fondly as my boss and the organiser of basically my business. But he was also very caring, and he became a bit like a sort of a substitute father to me out in Star City, and always wanted to look out for me. And actually, subsequently, cross paths, bumped into each other. Also we've been rather supportive. So he's come over to London at Science Museum events, for instance. Perhaps he and I do some of the same things, which is about communication. It's about making sure that people have got access to.
Oh, why do I feel so heavy today?
In a free way, and then we open up all of this, and it's fun. And so I think he's the lovely man. He's so.
I probably didn't get a good
night's
sleep last night.
energy.
I kept waking up.
This first spacewalker, and to be so human as well. Alex was a perfect person to choose for the Apollo Soyuz link up, and that's really also, I think, part of why he's continued to want to communicate and to reach out across countries, because he saw the benefits and sees how the world can operate if we do it together in a mutually beneficial way.
Helen Sharman, who will be one of many astronauts speaking at the Star Wars Festival in Bern in 2019. Now, tickets for the festival will go on sale towards the end of this year, so we'll keep you updated in case, like us, you fancy going along. Now, if you drive a couple of hours from Bern, you'll reach the International Space University in the city of Strasbourg in the Alsace region of northern France. It offers a number of space-related courses ranging from several weeks in duration to, in the case of their master's programme, 1 or 2 years. Now, I was there quite recently to give a lecture to the opportunity to chat to Professor Chris Welsh, who runs the Master of Space Studies course. Before long, we diverted into space memorabilia, but I did begin by asking you a serious question about where the university's alumni tended to end up.
Well, it's very common. Some of them do go on and work in space agencies. Some of them go on and work in universities, and some of them go on and work in space companies. Others set up their own space companies. The head of the space agency, SASA, Valentin Bunsami, is a SSB alumni.
SSB?
The Space Studies Programme. In terms of people working for space companies, you find people in SpaceX, Airbus, Boeing, all the space companies, alumni there. And then in the space sector, companies like Planet, one of the three founders, ISU Masters alumni. And in a UK context in particular, the company Spire Global was set up by master's students 5 years ago while they were on their internship. Raised $150,000 on Kickstarter to launch their first CubeSat. And now, 5 years later on, the company is worth, I think, about $250 million, and they employ 200 people worldwide.
You get a share?
Unfortunately not. I wish I had thought to sort of request equity, but I didn't think of that.
And so,
Dumbbell rules now.
Same way. In terms of which specific area of the space industry that they want to concentrate their studies.
Well, we have a very broad curriculum here. We're not just a science school and engineering school. When we say it's disciplinary, we have what we consider to be the ISU disciplines. You can split them up somehow. So we have space engineering, we have space science, physical sciences, we have space applications, which includes communications and so on, space management and business, policy, economics and law, human performance in space, which is all to do with physiology, ecology and spaceflight, and lastly, the humanities, so also cultural studies on art, on communication, and so on.
I met the NASA astronaut class of 2013, Jessica Meyer. She's got a master's from here, hasn't she?
Indeed, yes, she is our first ISU master astronaut. We hope to have more in due course. And there are many what we call global faculty members, members of the ISU family, who are also involved with ISU. We sometimes had ISU resident faculty who are former astronauts here, actually, sort of teaching the students.
It's like an ideal job, really, isn't it, for somebody who's a space nut? Because I had to describe the room that we're doing this interview in, because I thought the Space Boffin's office was filled with, I hate to use the word tax, space tax, but looking around, you've got miniature rockets, space books, pictures, pennants, models of spacecraft. There's a lunar lander over there. What looks like some sort of Russian flight suit hanging up on the head. What is that?
I was watching that. That's a MiG pilot's G suit. Over there, you can see the helmet. I bought that in the 1990s in Moscow because I could. $100 on Arbatskaya.
And that's quite unusual, because you've got a poster up on the wall of the first Anglo-Soviet space mission, do you know, which was Helen Sharma, first astronaut.
That's right. Well, I was involved in that. I was candidate number 23 before getting ejected for having a left nostril of insufficient quality.
You're not bitter.
Well, it's better than being thrown out on psychological grounds. And that actually came from a display they had on the final night of the selection at the Science Museum. And they had a rather strange television program. It's been like a reality TV program would be nowadays, where they showed off the 4 finalists and announced the final 2 at the end of the evening. I came away with that.
That's wonderful.
I've had it ever since.
So which is your most treasured possession?
Probably right now, something I have received only just today. It's a little piece of knitting or mesh.
Probably only about 3 or 4 centimetres across.
3 or 4 centimetres across. But this is part of the cargo net that was in the Grumman Apollo 13 lunar module Aquarius. So this small piece of knitting has been around the moon and back. So some of my collections of meteorites and rocks that leave the space. This is, I think, my most travelled possession. And I'm still sort of, looking at it. I'm not quite stroking it, saying my precious. But
almost, yeah.
I'm still looking at it and feeling very happy.
I can tell. I can absolutely tell. And also, I know that you get some quite incredible high-status speakers here constantly. Yeah. Do you use this as an excuse to get astronauts that you've always wanted to meet to come and speak?
Well, we certainly try. We've got an Well, we certainly try. We've got an astronaut panel here for the students in a few weeks. So yes, ISU is very well connected internationally. All the trustees has representations from the space agencies, big space companies, and so on. And so it is easier for us to attract these high-profile speakers.
Chris Welch from the International Space University in Strasbourg.
Now, you said he was a master of space studies. Is that like a Jedi master?
He runs the Masters, so he could well be,
I'd be a master of space.
Who wouldn't? And their next space studies programme, a short one, is in the Netherlands, and it runs from June to August, so do check their website if you're interested in going along. And I'll put a few photographs of some of that memorabilia on the Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, probably, because they really are brilliant. So please go.
Now, there is only one astronaut in the entire history of spaceflight so far who has flown 3 completely different spacecraft. Gemini twice, Apollo twice, and the Space Shuttle also twice. Not only that, John Young flew the first Gemini mission, the first Space Shuttle mission, and walked on the moon as commander of Apollo 16. Well, I only met him once back in 1999, but he was still working at NASA. He was the most unassuming of all the Apollo era astronauts. John Young died in January, aged 87. Here in 3 minutes, all his space missions, from Gemini 3 in 1965, Space Shuttle Columbia in 1983, the first international mission. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, ignition. And we have a liftoff. We have a liftoff. Controllers reporting that all systems looking fine. IUDNC, all solid for go flight. With Gemini 10 in orbit, in less than 7 hours after the start of this 3-day mission, the 2 craft locked noses safely and without difficulty as they soar over the Pacific Ocean about 185 miles out in space. Later, the combined vehicles outthrust to record heights as high as 476 miles. Apollo 10, Houston, over. Roger, Houston, Apollo 10, you can tell the world that we have arrived. Roger, 10, it's good to have you. Look at this rig. The guidance was absolutely fantastic, and we'll give you the burns right now.
Yes,
The ridge is just beautiful. Hey, right west, Guard. Wow, there's that ridge to the north. Yep, sure is. All we gotta do is jump out the edge, and we got plenty of rock. Houston, boy, it sure looks like you can make, I see ground trader from here. I can see grade trader from here. Boy. I don't have a place to get program alert, but that's your radar breaker. Charlie's got nothing but a ridge to look at. That sounds beautiful, John. Wish I were there. Smooth sailing, baby, to astronauts John Young and Bob Griffin. Good morning, boys. Shall I read?
Here you see 6 men getting off a spaceship after 10 days in space. They haven't had a bath. You might say this is 6 dirty old men, but and they probably really are. Looking forward to a shower. And I think they're pretty darn steady considering how long they've been up there.
That's great. I really enjoyed that.
John Young. So we had Gemini 3, Gemini 10, Apollo 10, Apollo 16, first space shuttle STS-1, and we had STS-9 at the end. And the sort of jingle in the middle of the wake-up call for
The creepy
STS-1.
wake-up, John.
Yeah, I can't remember their names. They were famous who's DJs had this show the other day. No, I would look. I mentioned them before on Space Podcast. I'll find out. And you mentioned, David, I'm listening to that. I said 6 missions. You said 7 launches. So explain.
Well, of course, while most launches occur on the surface of the Earth where the future of the mission is at stake with regard to the flight, every astronaut feels that a launch that goes awry does not result in his death. The 7th launch for John Young was, of course, off the surface of the Moon, where indeed, on that occasion, his life very much did depend. And while there have been 5 flights before off the surface of the Moon, nevertheless, that's one serious hefty when you know that your life depends on getting off the surface. So yes, actually, 6 missions.
And what's remarkable, man, I met him once, and it was extraordinary. He was sort of thrust upon me. It was at NASA in 1999, and they said, "Oh, you might want to interview this guy. He was one of the Apollo astronauts." And I was fairly young at that point, and I wanted to basically ask them the anniversary coming up, what would you like to walk on the moon? He didn't want to talk about that. He wanted to talk about computers. And it was the dullest interview. He was so unassuming, and just wanted to share the credit with everyone. Which is rubbish for me as a radio reporter, but I mean, enormous respect for the man. You heard it there at the end as well.
He was really a terrific man, and I can remember in Houston, the BBC 2 came in during 1966 to make a film about the astronauts preparing for the upcoming Apollo missions. This was a few months before the fire, and I remember John, when I said, "We've got some Brits over here from the BBC," and his eyes lit up, and he just couldn't stop him talking in that drawl of his, in that wonderful way. But on the serious side, I think we felt that John epitomised the legacy of the Mercury sector. Really tough guy, straight talking, plain talking individuals who said things as they were and who punched for their own side and not for their own egos. And yet it came across to many people as the most happy egos. But what they had a big sense of was responsibility to the job they were doing. And John's commitment to safety and the way he pushed and pushed and pushed and survived the reversals from management that wanted to actually sideline him because he was becoming too troublesome on pushing for safety. He held the line, and I think while many around him were playing politics in the astronaut corps, he simply kept the solid truth: we're here to fly, we're here to do it safely, all of us together.
Oh, thank you, David. But it's been great having you on the podcast, actually. It's been full of insights into space history, effectively. Yeah, very good. So our guest there, David Baker, and we're at the British Interplanetary Society. And thanks also to the Atrium Space Insurance Consortium for support our podcast.
Space Boffins is a Boffin media production in partnership with the scientists. Do look us up on social media. Try to see what happens. Feel free to send us any more questions like Jeff did. And thanks for listening.
Your team just added its 67th AI tool and also your 67th security blind spot. The good news, the Vanta agent works like a GRC engineer in the background, finding every app your team uses, scoring the risk and drafting fixes for you. Vanta is the platform used by over 16,000 fast-moving companies like Cursor, Atlassian and Superbase, who are shaping the future with AI and staying ahead of AI risk. Get started at Vanta.com. Your team just added its 67th AI tool and also your 67th security blind spot. The good news, the Vanta agent works like a GRC engineer in the background, finding every app your team uses, scoring the risk and drafting fixes for you. Vanta is the platform used by over 16,000 fast-moving companies like Cursor, Atlassian and Superbase, who are shaping the future.
Most of the world. And the formation of...
Now, there is only one astronaut in the entire history of spaceflight so far who has flown 3 completely different spacecraft. Gemini twice, Apollo twice, and the Space Shuttle also twice. Not only that, John Young flew the first Gemini mission, the first... 3, 2...
All flight control mode. Commander John Young controlling the vehicle. Here you see 6 men getting off a spaceship after 10 days in space. They haven't had a bath. You might say this is 6 dirty old men.
It launched really...
Very good. So our guest there, David Baker, and we're at the British Interplanetary Society. And thanks also to the Atrium Space Insurance Consortium.
Space Boffins is a Boffin media production in partnership with the Naked Scientists. Do look us up on social media. Try Instagram, see what happens. Feel free to send us any more questions like Jeff did. And thanks for listening.
Your team just added its 67th AI tool and also your 67th security blind spot. The good news, the Vanta agent works like a GRC engineer in the background, finding every app your team uses, scoring the risk and drafting fixes for you. Vanta is the platform used by over 16,000 fast-moving companies like Cursor, Atlassian and Superbase, who are shaping the future with AI and staying ahead of AI risk. Get started at Vanta.com. Your team just added its 67th AI tool and also your 67th security blind spot. The good news? The Vanta agent works like a GRC engineer in the background, finding every app your team uses, scoring the risk, and drafting fixes for you. Vanta is the platform used by over 16,000 fast-moving companies like Cursor, Atlassian, and Superbase, who are shaping the future with AI and staying ahead of AI risk. Get started at Vanta.com.
All these engines are started?
That was really good.
We'd like it to stir up your crowd then.
Station, this is Houston. Are you ready for the event?
Welcome to another edition of the award-winning Space Muffins podcast in partnership with the Naked Scientists. I'm Richard Hollingham, and this is Sue Nelson.
This time we talk to the astronaut helping to design NASA's new space capsule, and we'll be hearing about the telescope being built to track killer asteroids.
In our continuing mission to visit the historic space institutions of London, we're in the council room today of the Royal Astronomical Society. Probably hear from the acoustic, because how vast this room is. We're ahead of a large oak table, leather-topped, as you would expect, somewhere like this, and in a room lined floor to ceiling with books. I mean, it really is fantastic. But it's audio. I mean, hopefully those books, the age of those books are coming across.
Yes, and more importantly, the fact that you've got one of those ladders to get to your top shelves, which remind you of the ones that Audrey Hepburn had. Funny face, I think, where they sort of roll across.
Maybe later they'll let us have a go.
Actually, isn't there a secret doorway here,
There is a secret doorway. If you look down there, it is locked, but up there is a secret passage up to the roof, which we did go up on mass one day when the sky was red over London with volcanic dust. We went up to Ethereum Sun.
Oh, fantastic. Well, better introduce our guest, actually. It's Dr. Robert Massey, who you've just heard, astronomer and Deputy Executive Director of the Royal Astronomical Society, and beside me, Dr. Helen Cluse, who's the Assistant Editor for the Society's Journal. And this journal, the monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society, fairly catchy title, has been going for 188 years. That's incredible. And then you've got the Society coming up with its 200th anniversary. So you've got this tradition behind you. You've got astronomy that's one of the oldest sciences, effectively. Is it as exciting today as it's always has been?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. If not more exciting. It's probably the oldest science ever since people could look up at the stars. They needed them to navigate, to create maps, and to find a way around to traverse the oceans. And now it's even more exciting because we've got to the point where we can actually travel outside of Earth. It's absolutely amazing, the sort of thing that people dreamed of, like people used to look up at Mars and imagine what would be there.
And now we know.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating, and it's only going to get more and more exciting.
Now, there's a scene in the second best space film of all time, The Right Stuff, where the silver-suited Mercury astronauts, led by John Glenn, get to see their space capsule for the first time, and they are not impressed. It doesn't have a window or controls, they'll just be spam in a can. Well, eventually, with the press clamoring at the door, the engineers can see both the porthole and instruments, so the spacemen get to pilot their spacecraft. Well, a similar process is going on now in Houston, albeit in slow motion, as engineers and astronauts debate the interior design of the new Orion capsule. Designed to take humans to the moon and Mars, the spacecraft's due for its first launch with a crew sometime in the early 2020s. Today, the astronaut taking the John Glenn role is a former submarine commander, veteran of 3 space shuttle missions, Steve Bowen. I asked him what Orion's like inside.
It's really cramped. The 4 seats, the way they're positioned in the vehicle, just sort of optimizes the volume in a sense. The 2 crew members not looking out the windows, we call the pilot commander, people looking out the window, and then below them are the other 2, you're looking at the seat pan of the guy above you, and then your feet are almost at the bulkhead, so it's really tight for 4 people in there, and then once you get to orbit, I don't know if all 4 people will be able to comfortably stretch out all their appendages at the same time, just you'll be bumping into each other a lot, but it's been done before. That's prohibitive, because they make sure you're used to tight spaces.
How are the astronauts training on it, finding the Orion?
We're learning a lot. We're discussing a lot of crew operations, and we're evolving. We're not final on a lot of the designs inside the cockpit in the sense that the exact locker configuration is close to what we think we're going to have, but there's tweaks that we can make that will influence how we operate, the seat configuration. Once we get that aspect of it done, we'll have a better understanding of the living quarters that you have and how you're going to operate inside of it. We spend enough time in there to think that it is the way it's going to be. We're always looking to improve it. Somewhere down the road, we'll get to a final design. That will give us our settled chance. Okay, now we have this. How do we actually go live in it for weeks on end? I don't know anybody finds it too spacious, but I haven't heard anybody really complain about not being able to live in those confines.
One of the big criticisms of the space shuttle, apart from the early flights, was there was no escape system. I mean, it just couldn't be with the way it was configured and the flight deck was configured because you had 2 decks. How is that going to work with Orion? Is that something you're already working on?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The abort system test, I think, is next year, or is it the end of this year? Anyway, it's coming up, AA2. That'll be really exciting to see. That's a similar abort system with a rocket on the top to a bubble, and there's a big test for that. As far as longer-term aborts, we are looking at those. We're looking at how you would recover. Should you have to abort early in a flight, late in a flight, how do you get back? That's always part of the mission design from the beginning to the end. If something goes wrong at any given point, how are we going to get back to, at least back down to Earth? Maybe an uncomfortable place to land, but they'll give you more of a fighting chance than not.
And the other thing, you're revisiting a almost 50 years on, is splashdown once more. And I guess the last American splashdown was with Apollo Soyuz in the mid-1970s. So again, you have to go out to sea and drop this in the water.
Yeah, yes, and that's a new process altogether, because the capsule itself is significantly heavier than the Apollo capsule, and there's no crane that's going to go, or helicopters that's going to pick it up, quickly take you back to the deck of a ship in the capsule. So the process, the underway recovery testing that we've been doing, we just completed underway recovery test 6, ULT 6 off of Costa California last month, and it was interesting to see. We have a test article that they get out in the ocean. We try and grab it and bring it back into the well deck of a LPD ship, USS Anchorage in this case, and at what point we take the crew out, how the vehicle. I was out there for the underway portion so that better understand what the environment's going to be like on board the vehicle once you do splash down. It doesn't have a keel, it doesn't have its own propulsion. It's going to basically be wallowing around, and it'll be an interesting ride in this low sea stage. So the question becomes, when you get the crew out, you get them out early, as soon as you can. And there's risks involved with getting them out while they're still floating around in the ocean.
Which always happens with Mercury, happened with Gemini, happened with Apollo.
Exactly, yes. Or do you want to just leave them in the capsule and bring them into the well deck where they can get out and basically drive land? And there's trades in there. There's probably certain service trades where either one or one of the other would be preferred. High sea states, you may want to bring them in. Low sea states, they may want to get out. It'll be a call. But until we understand that better, we have to definitely work on both means of recovery.
And after 3 weeks with 3 other people in that capsule, that's potentially one of the worst parts of the mission, is wallowing in the ocean for a couple of hours.
You focus on that first couple missions, 3 weeks, or I think, a couple of the missions down the road, 42 days, but ultimately this vehicle is going to be years, right? If we go to Mars in this vehicle, even if we have a habitat that takes us there and back, the crew members will spend years on orbit, or years in space, not on orbit. So their physical condition is going to be very different than any of the earlier programs. We're trying to understand based on our knowledge, with ISS crew members. And it'll be a difficult recovery when we get to those longer missions. And that emphasizes how important the habitat you design that we'll take them on these longer missions will be, what you need to do to get them home, and how quickly you need to get them once they're on the planet.
So what was that like, bobbing around in the ocean in this capsule? Were you on your own? Did you have 3 other people with you?
No. Actually, this capsule won't let us do that on this one.
Right.
I did do some testing this summer in Galveston Bay with 4 crew members rolling around a little bit inside of Galveston Bay. But it's just from my boating experience and having spent some time.
You're gassed out already.
It can be very disconcerting if you're not used to it, and every time there's a perturbation in it. Those jerking moments, they can be pretty provocative, regardless of how much. It can be pretty provocative, regardless of how much time you've actually spent at sea.
You're using very diplomatic language.
Thank you.
I imagine it's horrible.
Well, I have had enough experience at sea to see some of the saltiest crew members I've ever met in my life get violently ill when just the right circumstances come up. It's not a case where you can say, I'll never get seasick, or I've never been seasick before. It's a real possibility.
Wow. So that's Sylvester Gordon, Steve Bowen, a potential customer for the new Orion capsule. I guess before we talk about that, I forgot to ask about toilets. And I can't believe I forgot to ask about toilets. I've since been in touch with NASA, and so I can confirm there will be a toilet in this capsule. We've heard how cramped this capsule is for 4 people. There will also be a toilet. There will also be a toilet there. So, essentially, you will be there. The minimum time we talk about is 21 days for the first mission, a short 3-week mission. So you will essentially be there sharing a space the size of a small bathroom with 3 work colleagues and a toilet.
Or you can look at it this way: you're in a capsule, you're in a sort of spacefaring portaloo.
Well, that's essentially what it is. Yeah, but you've got to have something. You can't do the Apollo thing. And I think that's what comes across from that interview. I thought the stuff about Smash was fascinating, and he was very candid, I thought. But it's much more, Robert, isn't it, than Apollo++. This is a whole new design, although it initially looks like things we've seen before in the 60s. This is very different.
I think you're right, but I think it is simple. This is what the astronauts and scientists would have recognised. We haven't gone through a technological step change mindset. So yes, there are blueprints and tools and those kind of things, but they are still using fundamentally the same technology. Previous ESA Director General was thinking about different broadcast systems for good reason. Good thing there too. The thing I was struck by was he wasn't really selling it as experience. He sat there talking about 21, exactly what he was describing, 21 days in a small bathroom. You think, wow, we've actually set a little bit bigger than our mission to Mars. Obviously, we've seen those tests on psychology like Mars and some aspects of that, albeit not the zero gravity and the alpha risks that you suffer. So it's very interesting to see. I wish they are. I want to. It would be really nice to see people walking on the moon again soonish. Certainly in my lifetime, see. I'm not sure I want to travel in. Well, imagine a 2-year mission to Mars. A minimum probably of 2 years. If you're the most favourable conditions for us to get there, a year on the surface, 6 months coming back, and in a vehicle that's not very good. You've got to be able to we're going to do it. It's a commercial airline. I think we're wrong.
It's the way he described it even at the beginning as being really cramped and not actually having full movement when you sat down. I was thinking, my goodness, I get backache if a film is over 2 hours long in the
it will be weightless, though. And I think he was also alluding to the habitation module, but that won't be on his own twice. So they're talking about, a month potentially just in this capsule. The missions to Mars you'd have, conceivably, they haven't built it yet, or they can't design it, but there will be a habitation module attached to that, a bit like a module for space station. Nice.
Nevertheless, it's absolutely, space is not a comfortable thing. We kind of imagine, if we look at science fiction ideas, harking right back to one of the earliest ideas, 2001, some luxury habitats that are so far. It's worth reflecting on that when we look at Elon Musk and so on. They talk about these ideas. Doing it for a lot of people just isn't really practical right now. Level, when you look at research, you get many volunteers wanting to do it, but at the same time, I think the physical demands are going to be restricted for that reason alone to a small number.
But then the way that Elon Musk and others will want to do it will not be probably like this, because the Orion capsule does look like a large Apollo capsule. They're going back, like we said, to the sort of tried and tested technology. And perhaps the answer is the way that the commercial companies are thinking is do something completely different. Because it just, his descriptions, and you're right, I'm amazed at how honest he was about it. It just sounded like the early days of space travel. It sounds like, there's kind of, you see a Mercury capsule on display anywhere, and you just go, good grief.
But
it's like a chair surrounded by buttons.
That's essentially his role, though. I mean, that's why I alluded to the right stuff, because that's his role, is to advocate on behalf of astronauts working with the engineers to get the best thing they can. What I was interested about is you so want to go to space, and to see your face when he was describing the landing, the splashdown back into the sea.
Well, I don't even like people hugging me if I don't know them. So to be that close proximity, with, I just, oh yeah, and the toilet thing and the ocean, I get, well, as you know, I slightly told a white lie about my motion sickness capabilities to go on the ESA before Christmas. So I do get terribly seasick. I'm okay on planes, but the thought of it, and also it didn't sound particularly. I mean, we were all, let's face it, and you as well, Helen. So we were all pulling faces, weren't we? About waiting there, bobbing around when you think we're going to sink.
Well, the first thing I thought of was, I wonder if they've thought about whether women would be better equipped because they're smaller. Do you remember recently there was a thing in some caves where they had to find there was some really important remains in these caves, and they put a call out for women who could do this, who were below a certain height, and very successful. So I wonder if that would have any difference. Very, very, very little, but it may be worth.
Well, that was the additional considerations for the astronauts. They all had to be under 5'10". They had to be specifically at that height because otherwise they wouldn't fit in. And you're right, naturally, in the early days it favoured women because on the whole women are shorter and they weigh less, which means you need less fuel. So
I'm 5 foot tall. It's so much easier for me when I'm on public transport. So maybe.
Can I just briefly talk about the science of what this is actually going to be doing? We've reset. We're now back at the moon. We're in the big space gateway in orbit around the moon, the space station, potentially going down to the surface of the moon, then on to Mars. How does that sit with what you feel about the science, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of science to be fair.
Hi. Welcome to the stream. Thanks for dropping in.
Position we as an organisation. My personal feeling is that I can see good arguments for sending people there on grounds, for instance, particularly unless we reach a far future point where cyborgs androids that are capable of doing this kind of thing when we're long from that. So people do have an innate flexibility. It's very hard to get machines to have you. It's the thing about Harrison Schmidt going to the moon and spotting orange soil, and a robot really struggles to do that kind of thing. At the end of the day, you'll be sitting there in mission control, steering the camera, looking for things. Now that's obviously far cheaper. There's no risk to human life as a result. But the science that can be done is I guess it's perhaps more productive if you do get people there. Now you might then argue, well, if you've got to spend 20 billion sending people there, you can send 100 Mars rover missions there. But I think it's fair to say that if you were able to set up the base and you had that flexibility, you can manufacture things in situ. There are a lot of unanswered questions, both on the moon and Mars, and reasons for going there, and things that probably people would be quicker to at least gather the evidence for, and so on that basis. So there are good scientific reasons for exploring both worlds, and I think it's legitimate to send people to do that. But we shouldn't get ourselves. A lot of this is about exploration. It's about human expansion rather than necessarily always having a science. That's been the case of the space station.
Right.
And do you think this will actually happen, this Orion project? I mean, it's been so long delayed. In fact, the name Orion has kind of been reused and recycled back into this.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I guess it probably will. They're still doing the development. There's still a bunch of test flights, and that's further on than the constellation was. So perhaps we'll see. It would be nice to, not just for reason doing it, obviously, it would be great from my personal perspective to see these things happening. I was far too young to remember the Apollo missions. And, I don't know whether I'll see anybody go back to the moon, but I think I'm probably expecting people to develop on this. And also the fact that other nations are looking at it as well, if it isn't a very good chance.
Absolutely. Still to come, we'll be discussing Europe's latest plans to protect the world from killer asteroids. This is the Space Dolphins podcast in partnership with scientists.
You can can reach us on all the usual channels, from Instagram to email, and we'll post some pictures of our recording today here at the Royal Astronomical Society. We also did a video in the lift. If you watch the video, it sounds worse when I say it out loud.
My fiance's sister.
And we also have some pictures of the inside of the Royal Capsule. Facebook page. Wally Funk's Race for Space, where you can find pictures. And also there's a video there as well from one of his recent TV appearances. Which, I mean, it's hugely entertaining.
Oh, it's got stuck in. Oh, my stuck.
I spoke to her yesterday on the phone actually, and she went, "How was I? How was it? I just got off the plane," and I was like, "Whoa!" But you can sort of see that, but she's still utterly charming in it. Right, well, if rogue nuclear nations, killer flu bugs, and melting polar ice caps aren't enough to keep you up at night, there's always an asteroid on a potential collision course with the Earth. Fortunately, another weapon in our planetary arsenal is almost complete, in the form of a European ground-based telescope called Fly-Eye that will survey the sky with the aim of alerting the planet to risky objects heading our way. I spoke to Declan Krushny, the co-head of the Near-Earth Objects Division of the European Space Agency recently, and began by asking him how seriously we should be taking the likelihood of an asteroid smash.
I think a good example is what happened in February 2013 in Chelyabinsk, or over Chelyabinsk, which is a city in Russia. And there, what happened was that a 20-meter asteroid entered the Earth's atmosphere and it blew up in something we call an airburst. The shockwave damaged windows, it damaged large areas, and we had 1,500 people or something like that hurt. Now, what we're preparing for is something like this. If we know this coming, we can warn the people and they go away from the windows and nobody gets hurt.
I remember seeing an awful lot of footage about that on social media, because nowadays so many people have security cameras or a dash cam on in their car. How likely is it to happen on a relatively regular basis, something like that?
Well, we can always come up with statistics. And the average number between two such events, purely statistically, is about 10 or several times. So we expect something like that to happen several times per century. Now, since it's statistics, and since we don't know where these objects are, it could basically happen tomorrow again, or it could not happen for another 50 years.
How did you predict that one? Did anybody on Earth predict that?
No, this one we did not foresee coming, and the reason was it was coming from the direction of the sun. So basically, if you wanted to spot it, you need to look in daylight, and that's something which, with a ground-based telescope, we cannot do. With a space-based telescope, to see those, we don't have them because they're too expensive. So for these objects, also in the future, we will be blind.
So we're exposed, effectively?
We're exposed to 70% because the other 70% we can see during the night because they come right from all directions. You can always see a bit more than half of the night sky. So that's what we're preparing for, and that's where we think it's worth investing money, just to cover at least the 70%.
And part of this preparation includes a new ground-based telescope.
Right. So far, these asteroids are being discovered by American-funded surveys. Now, in Europe, since about 10 years, we have something called the Space Situational Awareness Program. One of our big projects is to also provide additional telescopes in these existing survey programs, as we call it. And we're currently constructing a telescope. It's being built in Italy, which is a 1.2-meter telescope which will scan the complete night sky in only 2 nights. That's fast.
And when will it be online?
Well, we currently expect this telescope to be ready at the end of 2019. So, we want to have it on the mountain. It will most likely go to Sicily. So it's an Italian-built telescope. One of the ideas is don't put it too far away, so you can fix things if they go wrong. And then this first telescope will probably end up in Italy, say, beginning of next year, but then it always takes some time to get everything ready and working. So my prediction is end of next year, and then hopefully the second telescope will be able to go in Chile on the fantastic clear skies of the southern hemisphere, where we don't have many telescopes yet.
Now, in terms of the potential damage that an asteroid can do with a direct impact on Earth, what's the sort of, you mentioned 20 metres being the one in Russia, what's the sort of size range that's effectively the difference between cataclysmic, life-threatening, and a roof tile being knocked off?
Yeah. Okay, when it comes to the sizes, let me think. I would say what we are typically assuming, anything smaller than 10 meters, we don't really worry about. So again, statistically, they don't do any damage. Something like Chelyabinsk was 20 meters, a bit smaller. Well, it hurt people, so that's definitely something we want to worry about. This will happen every 10 to 100 years, something like that.
Between 10 and 20 metres, that's not really big in order to detect it.
Yeah, the smallest objects that have been detected are like 5-6 meters, so they're even smaller than what we worry about. The problem is you only see them when they're really close, and when they're really close, you have to look in the right direction. And that's why currently we don't see that many, because the surveys, they look more deep, we call them deep surveys. So they spend like a month to scan the whole sky, and they see far away objects. But what they miss is the small ones which are close, because they fly somewhere else where you don't look. With our new telescope, we have a very large field of view, so we can scan the complete night sky much faster. We will not miss those objects. That's the special thing.
And this is the one that's going to be called Fly Eye, is that right?
It's called fly eye because, you know, nowadays if you want to build large field of view, it's like a wide angle lens. If you have a photographic camera, you have a zoom lens or telelens, and you have a wide angle lens. So we need a wide angle system, but still with a very large mirror. That's difficult to build, so the concept we came up with is like a fly's eye. That's why it's called fly eye telescope, where you basically have a number of lenses that each system looks into a slightly different area in the sky. So if you combine it all with one shot, you get a very large field of view. You get a wide angle view.
So we've got the smaller asteroid sizes. What about those bigger ones that are going to cause problems?
Right, the next step up is like 40, 50 meters in size. And there we have two examples. One is the Tunguska event, which was a bit over 100 years ago. That also happened in Russia. So it's a big country. It's more a statistical thing again. It's more a statistical thing again because it has such a large area. Now, that shockwave that it generated basically would have damaged a complete city. Like, it would have been gone had it happened over long. Now, if it were made of iron, it would the atmosphere and make a big crater like the one we know from Arizona, meteor crater in Arizona. That was maybe a 50 meter. It was iron, so it's very solid, goes all the way through the atmosphere, hits the ground, it makes a crater. So that's something which is still only giving you local effects, what we call it regional effects. So you would need to evacuate, say, a country or something like that. If you go even bigger, say 100 meters or 150 meters in size, you can't even run away anymore. That's the size of object.
And then I'm done for the day.
Actively deflect them. So what you do is you like run a spacecraft into the asteroid and you push it away. You do that, you can only push it very, very small amount. But if you do this early enough, then you're safe. It will avoid the Earth. Now, something like a, say, 150 meter object only occurs every few thousand years, but again, it's statistics, so we need to be prepared. It's like being bitten by a shark. I mean, that happens, I don't know, once in 10 million or something. Still, you put up signs saying, be careful, there are sharks in there. And that's why we are preparing for demonstrating such an asteroid deflection. So we are currently planning to, we're studying a mission that could actually demonstrate that.
How much better is this again?
Ministerial Council meeting, we will propose this mission to be actually built.
It's all very Hollywood, isn't it?
It's you know, this is the thing. It sounds like Hollywood, but it's real. And now, asteroid impact threat is the only natural disaster that we can currently mitigate, that we can actually do something. We can predict them, because these things fly on predictable orbits around the sun, so we can predict, say, 10 years, 50 years, for some objects, even 100 years into the future where they are. We can, warn the people, we can just walk away, evacuate, or if it's a larger object, we have the technical capabilities to deflect them. That's the cool thing about it. So it's a threat, but we can use it.
Kojny from the European Space Agency. He's quite amazing, isn't he, actually?
He's very good, yes. I mean,
Although I did love the way you sort of mumbled as we were doing that. This is quite
It's organised, yeah.
Now, we didn't really discuss where these objects are coming from, and also whether it's not just asteroids either that we should be worried about.
We're mainly focused at the moment looking at the asteroid belt and the belt comets beyond the solar system, but these are all in the plane of the solar system. So we're only looking in certain directions at the moment. So that's why this is going to be so interesting, because if something comes in, like you were saying, from the sun towards us, or from above the solar system down towards the Earth, then they'll be able to detect that. Yeah, so it's absolutely vital. And then you hear them say, "Oh, the dinosaurs died because they didn't have a space program." Well, we need to be on this. And like a lot of things that we do in astronomy, you don't really know what the outcome is going to be until you do it. You don't really know, for example, with space travel, all the different technology that we've got from it. We didn't know we were going to do at the time. But this is something which we just need to do. It's not, there's things about human exploration and wouldn't it be wonderful, but we're all going to die if we don't sort this out in the next, few hundred years or whatever. So it's incredibly important and vital, and this is really exciting.
Would it be even more help if we had a telescope on the moon, or would it make no difference whether the telescope was on the moon or on the Earth?
I don't know, to be honest. I don't think it would make a massive difference. What do you think, Robert?
No, I don't think so. I think if it was in orbit, then you answer those questions about pointing it nearer to the direction of the sun than if it's on the ground when you've got this bright daylight sky and you can't see anything with. Being on the moon, it gives you a stable platform, but it's mainly good for radio astronomy because you're around the dark side, the far side of the moon, then you're shielded from terrestrial transmissions. Optical astronomy, it's a nice platform, but it's less pressing than putting a telescope just in space.
Now, Helen was saying just how important this is, and I think we got that from that interview as well. What do policymakers think? What do politicians think? Because it's been treated as a bit of a joke, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, there was a report on this quite a long time ago, actually, probably at least 12, 13 years ago, when the UK set up this asteroid information centre, which then
last it.
And that's fine, but actually there were very few proposals beyond that, and that tends to be the way things have worked. It's trying to survey the problem, understand that as they go for quite a long time, we need to increase the coverage, there is much going on, and so on. But in terms of tangible things to do, if we actually find all these things on the way, there are people with ideas about this, and some real plans in place to tackle it right now. I think
it seems very precise, doesn't it? Particularly, I think Tunguska should have been a wake-up call. I mean, the whole of London was disrupted that happened here. We were just lucky it was a statistical thing, the fact that there's so much land mass and water mass. But it's just a matter of time, and that really should be a wake-up call for people.
Even now, though, listening to him talk, it still felt like there are huge gaps, like this 30% gap. They're the ones that are coming from the sun. And then you say, Helen, about from a different plane. We're not doing enough.
No, we're not. And it's well, this global warming as well as a similar. It's what I do. Yeah. We've very much got to take. It's human nature to not be scared of things that aren't immediate. Anything that won't happen in my lifetime. But we, as intelligent people, need to start thinking about this because it is going to affect us, and it's just a matter of time. And can you imagine in 200 years when they look back and are like, why did they not sort this out? It would have been so easy. Well, not easy, but it would have been doable. And you know, then the whole city is going to be obliterated, if not worse.
I mean, that's an interesting thing, isn't it, for astronomy? Because when you think about, well, I do, when you think about why go into astronomy and become an astronomer, it's usually because people have specific areas. They think, oh, I'm interested in dark matter or nebula or how planets formed or this. You don't think of it in terms of preventing the obliteration of our planet, do you?
It's probably the most important thing we could ever do because obviously there are a lot of sciences that, like medicine, for example, is incredibly important, obviously. But this is something that will affect every single person, and not just person, like with global warming, it will affect our planet. It's something we need to be able to come together, a little bit like when people came together to build CERN, but in a different way, or with the global warming.
It's probably more important than CERN because CERN wasn't going to save the planet.
But that's an example.
Sorry, Brian.
That's an example of different countries being able to come together for a common scientific goal, like with the International Space Station as well, and other projects. So we need to be thinking about it in a more serious term, in the fact that no country on their own can do this. We need to work together.
Which brings us back to policy, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think actually some of this is cheap. Monitoring and building small telescopes really isn't that expensive. The mitigation strategies, the cost of those, I suppose, depends on the object you're talking about. A small one, if you can attach a small rocket and nudge it, that's not hugely expensive. If you're saving thousands of lives, potentially far more, obviously it gets more difficult with bigger objects. But you know, at least we understand how we could do this. I mean, there is an issue about, say, saying things like long period comets that we wouldn't necessarily have as much warning on because they come in from any direction. You might only have perhaps months, a few years. They would be more difficult. But asteroids were seen in orbits around the sun.
Right.
You know, you probably could have tens, hundreds, even longer than that. Years.
Be able
to do something about it.
All right. That's it for today's stream. The kids are starting to message me on Messenger and that sort of thing. So I'm cooked. My shoulders are cooked. My forearms feel all weak. So I'll see you again next time. Have a good night.